April 13th, 1945, Zwolle, Netherlands. The street lamps were dark. The cobblestones glistened with rain. And in the shadows between medieval buildings, a single Canadian soldier moved like smoke through the German garrison. His left eye was gone, covered by a black patch. His back had been broken in 3 places weeks earlier, and in his hands he carried a Sten gun and enough rage to liberate an entire city alone. The Germans didn't know his name yet, but they were about to learn fear. Before we continue, if you're enjoying these deep dives into the untold stories of World War II, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, whether it's Canada, the Netherlands, or anywhere else in the world. Your support helps us bring these forgotten heroes back into the light. Now, let's return to that cold April night in 1945. The sound of boots on stone echoed through empty streets. German sentries turned toward the noise, then vanished. One by one, the defensive positions went silent. When the sun rose the next morning, the citizens of Zwolle emerged from their cellars, expecting to see ruins from a massive artillery barrage. Instead, they saw their city intact, and walking down the main street was a single soldier, barely able to stand, radioing back to his regiment with 4 simple words: "The Germans are gone." In that moment, Léo Major became a ghost story. But the question that haunts military historians to this day is simpler than you might think. Did the German army actually know who he was? Or was the terror he inspired something far more primal, something that didn't need a name? To understand why one man could terrify an entire garrison, we need to rewind to 1944. By the summer of that year, Nazi Germany was fighting a war on 3 fronts. The Red Army was closing from the east. The Western Allies had broken out of Normandy, and in the flooded lowlands of Belgium and the Netherlands, the Canadian First Army was grinding forward through some of the most miserable terrain in Europe. The Germans had learned to respect the Canadians. In captured intelligence reports from late 1944, Wehrmacht officers described Canadian infantry as stormtroopers, aggressive, relentless, and especially skilled in night raids and close-quarters combat. They fought in conditions that would stall other armies. They adapted faster. They didn't quit. But this wasn't about nationalism or propaganda. It was about something darker. The Canadians fighting in the Netherlands in 1945 had been at war for years. They had survived Normandy, Caen, and the Scheldt. They had watched friends die in the mud, and they had developed a particular edge, a willingness to go into the darkness and do the ugly work that others couldn't stomach. Among these thousands of hardened soldiers, one name would eventually rise above the rest, not because he was superhuman, not because he was invincible, but because he possessed a quality that terrified the Germans more than tanks or artillery: unpredictability. Léo Major was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, in 1921. But his story truly begins in Montreal during the Great Depression. His childhood was brutal. His relationship with his father was catastrophic, a fundamental clash of wills that ended with young Léo leaving home as a teenager. He learned early that authority figures couldn't be trusted. He learned that survival meant relying only on himself. When he enlisted in 1940, the Army recognized something in him immediately. He wasn't built for parade squares or garrison duty. He was built for the gray zones, the space between the lines where soldiers operated alone or in pairs, gathering intelligence, disrupting supply lines, and killing in silence. They made him a scout and reconnaissance specialist. It was the perfect role for a loner. By June 6, 1944, Private Léo Major was landing at Juno Beach with the Regiment de la Chaudière. While others froze under machine gun fire, Léo found his rhythm. Within days, he had ambushed and captured a German half-track carrying code books and intelligence documents. It was a massive coup, but Léo didn't stop to celebrate. A few days later, he encountered 4 Waffen-SS soldiers during a patrol. A firefight erupted. Léo killed all 4, but in the final moments, one of them detonated a phosphorus grenade. The explosion seared Léo's face and destroyed his left eye. He was rushed to a field hospital. The doctors made their decision. Private Major was going home. Léo's response has become legendary. He stood up, bandaged and bleeding, and told the medical officer that he wasn't going anywhere. He argued with cold logic. He sighted his rifle with his right eye. His left eye was redundant. "I don't need it to kill Nazis," he said. Then he walked out of the hospital and returned to his unit. This was the moment the man began to fade and the myth began to form. To the Germans in Normandy, he was just another enemy soldier. But to the men of Le Regiment de la Chaudière, he was becoming something else. A symbol. If a man could lose an eye and refuse to quit, what excuse did anyone else have? By October 1944, the war had moved to the Scheldt estuary. The Allies had captured the port of Antwerp, but they couldn't use it. The Germans controlled their flooded lowlands leading to the sea. The Battle of the Scheldt would become one of the war's most miserable campaigns. Soldiers called it the drowning land. The terrain favored the defender. The Germans had flooded the fields, turning the battlefield into freezing mud studded with mines. Tanks sank. Men got trench foot. Death came from nowhere, but the Canadians kept pushing forward. And Léo Major, now the one-eyed scout, thrived in the misery. He conducted solo patrols in the darkness. He captured prisoners for interrogation. He disrupted German supply lines. And he moved like a predator through terrain that would have broken other soldiers. German sentries began to fear the night patrols. They knew the Canadians were out there. They just didn't know where. Then, during a heavy engagement, a Bren gun carrier struck a mine. The explosion threw Léo into the air. He landed hard. His back was broken in 3 places. 4 ribs were fractured. Both ankles were broken. Once again, the doctors told him the war was over. Once again, they underestimated him. Léo lay in that hospital bed, listening to the distant rumble of artillery. He thought about his friends dying in the mud without him. Weeks later, he managed to get the cast removed. The doctors warned him that returning to the front would cripple him for life. Léo didn't care. He found a jeep heading to the front, and incredibly, he deserted from the hospital to rejoin his regiment. By April 1945, the Regiment de la Chaudière was pushing into Overijssel province. Standing in their way was Zwolle, a medieval city of 50,000 people, garrisoned by German troops. The Canadian command faced a dilemma. Standard doctrine called for artillery bombardment followed by an infantry assault. But artillery would destroy the city and kill civilians. They needed intelligence. They needed to know how many Germans were left and where they were positioned. So they called for volunteers. 2 hands went up, Private Léo Major and his best friend, Corporal Wilfried Arsenault. Their mission was strictly reconnaissance. Get in, Contact the Dutch resistance, assess enemy strength, get out. They were not ordered to liberate the city. That would be suicide. At dusk on April 13th, Leo and Willie slipped past German outposts on the city's outskirts. But near a railway track, a German patrol spotted them. Flares went up. Machine gun fire ripped through the silence. Willie Arsenault was hit. He died there in the grass, just miles from the end of the war. Léo Major was now alone. The mission was compromised. The element of surprise was gone. Protocol demanded he retreat and report back, but Léo didn't operate on protocol. He operated on something darker. According to accounts he gave years later, something snapped. Not a hot, blinding rage, but a cold, calculating fury. He decided the Germans would pay for Willie. Not just the soldier who fired the shot. The entire garrison. What happened next has been debated by historians for decades. Not because the facts are disputed, they're verified, but because the scale of what Léo Major accomplished seems to defy military logic. He didn't just scout the city. He decided to take it, alone. But this isn't a Hollywood story. Léo didn't just run in shooting. He understood something fundamental about warfare in April 1945. German morale was brittle. They knew the war was lost. They were exhausted, scared, and terrified of being surrounded. Léo Major decided to weaponize that fear. His first move was tactical. He captured a German driver and his vehicle. But instead of killing him, Léo used him as a guide. The driver led him to a bar where a German officer was drinking. Léo disarmed the officer inside. The man spoke French. This was the key. Léo began to talk, not shout, not threaten. He spoke with the terrifying confidence of a man holding all the cards. And he lied. He told the officer that Canadian artillery would begin firing at dawn. He told him that a massive Canadian force, hundreds of men, tanks, flamethrowers, was already encircling the city. He offered a choice: evacuate now and live, or stay and be buried. Then Léo did something brilliant. He let the officer go. He gave him his weapon back and told him to warn his superiors. Why? Because Léo knew that fear spreads faster than bullets. He needed that officer to go back to headquarters and plant the seed of panic. He needed the Germans to believe the lie. Once the officer left, Léo began his performance. For the next several hours he ran through the darkened streets of Zwolle like a man possessed. He used a tactic known as force multiplication. He would sprint to one neighborhood, throw grenades, and fire his Sten gun in long, loud bursts. Then he would sprint to a different district and repeat the process. He raided machine gun nests from the rear. He captured groups of terrified soldiers, sometimes 10 or 15 at a time, but he couldn't guard them. So he marched them to the city limits, handed them to stunned Canadian units waiting on the perimeter, then ran back into the city for more. He did this 4 times. Inside Zwolle, chaos reigned. The German command was receiving reports of attacks from the north, south, east, and west simultaneously. The officer Léo had released was likely screaming that the entire Canadian army had infiltrated. The grenades, the fires Léo started at Gestapo headquarters, the constant movement. It all confirmed the lie. The Germans, fearing encirclement, began to withdraw. Trucks rumbled out of the city. Defensive positions were abandoned. And Léo Major kept moving, kept firing, kept feeding the illusion that he was everywhere at once. By 4 a.m., the shooting stopped. The last German convoy left the city. Leo, exhausted and in agony, found Willie's body and carried it back. When the sun rose over Zwolle on April 14, 1945, there was no artillery barrage. There were no tanks. There was just silence. The citizens emerged from their cellars expecting ruins. Instead, they saw their city intact. And walking down the street was a single Canadian soldier, barely able to stand, his eye patched dark against his pale face. He radioed back to his regiment. "The Germans are gone. You can come in now. So let's answer the question directly. Was Nazi Germany terrified of Léo Major? Did the high command in Berlin have a file on him? Did Hitler know his name? No. The Nazi regime, as a bureaucratic machine, was concerned with strategic bombing, the Red Army closing from the east, and industrial collapse. They didn't fear one Canadian corporal. But that's the wrong question. The right question is this. Did the German soldiers facing him fear him? Absolutely. The terror Léo Major inflicted was immediate, visceral, and tactical. It was the terror of a sentry standing in the dark, knowing something was out there. It was the panic of a garrison commander, realizing his perimeter had been breached by a force he couldn't see or count. The soldiers in Zwolle that night didn't know his name. They didn't know it was one man with one eye and a broken back. If they had, they would have simply swarmed him. But Leo weaponized the darkness. He weaponized their exhaustion and defeatism. He became the projection of their worst nightmare, the overwhelming Allied force closing in. They didn't run because they were cowards. They ran because Leo made them believe that staying meant certain death. When the story reached British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Leo was nominated for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, the second highest award for gallantry in the Commonwealth. But even here, the rebel surfaced. Leo reportedly refused the medal initially because he considered Montgomery incompetent. He only accepted later, not for the brass, but for Willie. After the war, Léo Major vanished into civilian life. He returned to Montreal and became a pipe fitter. He didn't write a book. He didn't give speeches. The man who had liberated a city single-handedly was just another face in the crowd. But peace didn't sit well with him. In 1950, when the Korean War broke out, Leo re-enlisted. He joined the Royal 22E Regiment, the famous Van Dues. And in November 1951, he found himself at Hill 355, a strategic position the Americans had lost to a massive Chinese assault. Leo was ordered to retake it. He didn't have a battalion. He had 18 men. Under cover of darkness, repeating the tactics he'd honed in the Netherlands, Leo infiltrated Chinese positions. He didn't just retake the hill. He held it. For 3 days, his tiny unit repelled counterattack after counterattack. The Chinese threw 2 entire divisions at Hill 355. Léo Major stood his ground. He called down mortar fire so close to his own position that the artillery officer asked if he was trying to kill himself. Leo replied, "Just drop it where I tell you." When the smoke cleared, Hill 355 was Canadian. For this action, Léo Major received his second Distinguished Conduct Medal. He remains the only soldier in Commonwealth history to receive this honor in 2 separate wars. Leo survived Korea. He returned to Quebec and lived quietly until his death in 2008. For decades, his neighbors had no idea the gruff old man next door was a legend. But in Zwolle, they never forgot. Every year on April 14th, the children of that Dutch city are taught his name. there is a Léo Major Street. There are monuments. He was named an honorary citizen. In his later years, Léo returned to Zwolle. The man who had once stalked those streets with a submachine gun was now welcomed with parades and tears. For Léo, this was the only validation that mattered. He didn't fight for generals. He fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. History often tries to turn war heroes into superheroes. We want to believe they were 10 feet tall and bulletproof. But the truth about Léo Major is more compelling. He was a man, a difficult, stubborn, rebellious man from Quebec, a man who lost an eye and kept aiming, a man who broke his back and kept walking. Nazi Germany didn't need to know his name to be defeated by him. They just needed to get out of his way. And on one cold night in April 1945, that's exactly what they did. The fear Léo Major inspired wasn't about recognition or fame. It was about presence, about will, about a kind of relentless determination that doesn't show up in intelligence reports or propaganda posters. The Germans in Zwolle didn't whisper his name in terror. They whispered about the phantom, the ghost, the force that came from the darkness and made them believe they were already surrounded. And in the end, that's more terrifying than any name could ever be.